The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 4th chapter. We're starting at verse 12. Now when Jesus heard that John had been arrested, he withdrew to Galilee. He left Nazareth and made his home in Capernaum by the sea, in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, so that what had been spoken through the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. The land of Zebulun, land of Naphtali, on the road by the sea across the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light. And for those who sat in the region and shadow of death, light has dawned. From that time, Jesus began to proclaim, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near." As he walked by the Sea of Galilee, Jesus saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." Immediately they left their nets and followed him. As he went from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, in the boat with their father Zebedee, mending their nets. And he called them. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and curing every disease and every sickness among the people. So his fame spread throughout all Syria, and they brought to him all the sick, those who were afflicted with various diseases and pains, demoniacs, epileptics, and paralytics, and he cured them. And great crowds followed him from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and from beyond the Jordan. The gospel of the Lord. Please have a seat. I'm sure you've all heard of the now famous Hubble Space Telescope. That's the multi-billion-dollar telescope they shot into space to be able to view the cosmos without any light interference from planet Earth. And they waited for the images to come back, and the first images were all out of focus. And they discovered, much to their chagrin, that the lens of the telescope was ground incorrectly. So another mission was set up, essentially to put like a monocle on the Hubble Space Telescope so it could see clearly. And once this problem was solved, the Hubble telescope began to send back to Earth images of stars and planets and other celestial stuff with a color and a clarity that nobody had ever seen before, ever. It also sent back images of a part of space that seemingly looked empty. There was nothing there. And this was something the astronomers were not expecting. If you or I went out into the country where there isn't a whole lot of light pollution and looked up into the skies, we could see clusters of stars, and we could see with our naked eye places where it didn't look like there were any stars at all. Even powerful Earth-based telescopes see the same thing. But the Hubble operated in space, far removed from the lights of Earth, sometimes in the Earth's shadow, in pitch darkness. It was supposed to see everything, everywhere. What it wasn't supposed to see was nothing. But in one part of the cosmos, the images being sent back had an empty spot in them. While the astronomers and astrophysicists were scratching their heads, one of the telescope's operators decided to point the telescope at this empty spot whenever the telescope wasn't needed to look at other things. And that's what he did. Over the course of 400 orbits of the telescope around the Earth, over the course of 800 exposures, the Hubble Space Telescope looked at that empty place for a total of 11 days. 11 days. From September 2003 to January 2004, it pointed itself at that empty spot to see what was there. That's 11 days. That's a long exposure. That's one hard look. And here's what they saw. It's coming. They're fixing the lens. Ta-da! Now, out where you're sitting, it's very likely that this just looks like a bunch of stars. And technically, that's what it is. But all the bright lights are not individual stars. All the bright lights are actually galaxies. Galaxies. What you're looking at is over 10,000 galaxies. And what you might be able to see is these little kind of frisbee-looking things going this way and that way and that way and that way and that way. And you can actually see the galaxies spinning at all different angles, all different colors, meaning all different distances from Earth, things that we had never seen before. And it was all in a part of space that looked empty. It just goes to show, things that first appeared devoid of anything interesting can reveal all kinds of interesting things if looked at long enough and with the right eyes. Well, something like this is what's going on in this part of Matthew we're looking at today. It is three little snippets that come in between two blockbuster events in the life of Jesus. His temptation by the devil comes right before it, and the Sermon on the Mount comes right after it, starting with the Beatitudes. Now, everybody knows about the temptation and the Beatitudes, and right in between, Matthew kind of tells us things that at first don't seem all that important. First few verses of our reading describe Jesus moving. It's moving day for Jesus. Where does he go? From Nazareth to Capernaum, which is a city that sits on top of the Sea of Galilee. And he's especially noting that Capernaum falls in the region of Zebulun and Naphtali. And that's why he has Isaiah's prophecy in his introduction to this material. Then we hear Jesus' proclamation of the nearness of the kingdom of God, and surprisingly, Jesus' proclamation is exactly what John the Baptist said. We might have expected something different, yeah? Something with a little more, pizzazz. But that's what we get. And then right after, we get a quick description of Jesus calling his first disciples, followed by Jesus proclaiming the kingdom in the synagogues and healing every disease among the crowds who come out to hear and experience in their own afflictions the power of the good news. It's good stuff, important stuff, but compared with what comes just before and just after, okay, it's pretty tame. Or so it would appear. Matthew is the only gospel where the beginning of Jesus' ministry is tied to the Isaiah prophecy. No other gospel writer mentions that. And it's the only one specifically mentioning Zebulun and Naphtali as where he went, the two regions in which he went and did most of his ministry. So, okay, why? What's behind Zebulun and Naphtali? Why is Matthew mentioning it? Is he just, trying to gin up his word count or something? No. Zebulun and Naphtali were the first regions to fall to the Assyrians in the 8th century BC. This Assyrian Empire waged a 19-year campaign to defeat and subjugate the northern kingdom of Israel. And what they did was, once they had subjugated a certain area, they took people from that area back to Assyria to enrich their culture, and they took people from Assyria into those areas that had been conquered so that their culture and their language and their customs would be infused into the local population so that their hold on the area would be absolutely airtight. Even in Jesus' day, this region was looked down upon because of the historic presence of foreigners, of Gentiles in this area. That's why Isaiah says, the Galilee of the Gentiles, the part of Galilee where the foreigners live, where the strangers live, where the outlanders live. And even in Jesus' lifetime, centuries later, the people who lived in this area had a different and despised accent because of the history of those areas. But it's this exact location that Isaiah says the light will first dawn. It's these people in the region of Zebulun and Naphtali who sit in the shadow of death, in darkness. Light will dawn on them first, because they will be the first to be redeemed by the Messiah. So it's no surprise then that where does Jesus, immediately after John is arrested, at the very first part of his ministry, relocate from Nazareth to Capernaum in the region of Zebulun and Naphtali? What is Matthew saying? What is underneath these seemingly anodyne words of Matthew? He's saying, look, Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is the one who is going to bring the light of dawn to all the oppressed people in the world. Redemption is dawning exactly as promised in a place considered polluted by alien people worshiping alien gods. It sets up the stage for Jesus' habit of showing up in places where people don't expect God to show up, and to love people often thought unworthy of even God's passing notice. So when Jesus speaks the same proclamation as John did before him, is it the same proclamation? I mean, same words, but does it have the same meaning, the same impact? No. John is the herald of the kingdom. We know that. Jesus is the kingdom. He embodies the kingdom. He is the good news. And what he does here next in Matthew illustrates the shape and the scope of the good news he brings. What happens whenever Jesus shows up? From his first move here to his very last in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus creates community. Matthew tells us Jesus gathers disciples. Even how Jesus gathers disciples in the Gospel of Matthew is inherently communal, because his first invitation is plural, not to a person, but to brothers. He sees Peter and Andrew, and he calls them, just like he does a little bit later, James and John. Now, this might seem like a little thing, okay? But I don't think we, the church, should ever forget this. Where Jesus shows up, true community is created. The people of Jesus' day did not forget this. Jesus noticed people. He noticed hurting people. He noticed people that the upright folks shouldn't notice. He ate with people that the law said he shouldn't eat with. He touched people nobody else would. He treated Gentiles the same as Jews. He treated men the same as women. He treated slaves the same as masters. He lifted up the poor and the downtrodden, and called upon the rich to look down every once in a while and to use their resources to lift up those on the bottom of society. Where the religious leaders of his day said, "Beware," Jesus moved in and blessed. Where the religious big shots of his day said, "Watch out," Jesus entered with words of welcome. Jesus absolutely came to close the distance between us and God. That's for sure. That's his first thing. But he also came to close the distance between us and our neighbors. And we, as the modern church, dare not forget this. You know, there's a whole lot of boundary making in Jesus' day, a lot of lines that you weren't supposed to cross. The Jewish law circumscribed certain people and certain actions that good God-fearing people would never dare to get anywhere close to. And Jesus, in almost every case, does what? Crosses those boundaries. Loves people who are deemed unlovable. Touches people who were literally thought to be dripping with spiritual poison. Talking with women, even foreign women, if you can believe that, as if they were just like anybody else, because they were just like anybody else. And ultimately, that's why they silenced Jesus, or at least they think they do, right? Because he was just redefining God's society in a way they could not tolerate. It was just too different from the piety of everybody who ran Judaism. Guess what? That has never changed. You would think that after Jesus came, all these walls, all these boundaries, all these lines, all these prohibitions would have decreased a little as Christianity spread around the globe, but no, it hasn't. In our world, there's line drawing, wall building, politics, religion, ethics, socioeconomics, you name it, the battle lines are drawn. The trenches are dug. And to be honest with you, I see very little in the way of constructive dialogue or compromise. These lines are not only etched into society, I fear they are etched into many people's hearts. And they simply won't go where the lines tell them not to. Even in the church, this happens. It's true. One faction of Christians looks at another as reducing the gospel to a hidebound, graceless, moral harangue, while the other fires back with accusations of Bible-denying woke liberalism run amok. And both are wrong, which is usually the case when disagreements devolve into name-calling. Jesus calls us to something better. Jesus calls us to something truer. Jesus calls us to something stronger than just parroting the age-old lines of demarcation. Jesus saw past all the reasons certain people should be avoided or maliciously labeled or condemned or simply ignored, and we as the church have to do the same. Jesus reserved his harshest condemnation for those who leveraged their religious scruples against people. And you know what he said. He called them whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the outside, but full of all kinds of filth on the inside. We don't want to be like that, do we? You know, I don't think anyone of any religious persuasion would agree that God sent Jesus in the world to teach us a better way to avoid one another, or to accuse one another, or to see in the other guy an enemy instead of a neighbor. You know, the world had more than enough of all that stuff years and years, decades, centuries before Jesus ever arrived on the scene. We still have too much, which is why this part of Matthew has so much to teach us. The seemingly empty transition between really cool biblical stuff is loaded with stuff we, the modern church, need to remember and put at the center of our life and our proclamation. You know, Jesus never invented a slogan or created banners or adopted a flashy persona. Jesus just spoke powerfully about the kingdom. He spoke powerfully to where people were frightened. He spoke powerfully to where people were sick. Powerfully to where people were made to feel lonely or less than or somehow circled out of the rest of the society. And after proclaiming this, what did Jesus do? He lived it for all the world to see. And that brings us to our last part of Matthew's transitional piece that we read today. What does the gospel look like when it's on its feet? What does the gospel look like when it's moving and active and doing stuff? Well, Matthew tells us. Jesus went throughout all Galilee, teaching in the synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom. Great, we already know that. And, there's more. Curing every disease and every sickness among the people. They brought to him all the sick. Those were afflicted with various diseases, and great crowds followed him from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and from beyond the Jordan. Where the gospel is at work, Matthew reports teaching and proclamation and healing are all happening together. It's not just teaching, it's not just proclamation, it's not just healing. It's all three of them. Where Jesus goes, people get put back together. In their bodies, they are healed. But when they are no longer sick, especially if they have a disease that is seen as a curse from God or renders them spiritually impure, that isolates them from their families. And now they can go back to their families, and they can go back to their communities, and children can be with their parents, and parents can be with their children, and husbands can be with wives, and brothers and sisters can be together. And that's what happens when the gospel is unleashed. People in themselves are put back together, and this community that Jesus creates is in itself healed and put back together. Where Jesus goes, where the gospel is unleashed, people learn about God's great love for them. People are lifted up and encouraged and given hope again. That's what happens when God's good news is unleashed. And that's exactly what we're called to do. To keep the power of the gospel moving and active through proclamation and teaching, and yes, healing. It's not our job to sit back and wait for something to happen. No. It's our job as the church, as Jesus followers, to make something happen, to make the gospel arrive and do its transforming work. Now, we can't cure disease like Jesus did, right? If anybody comes to me with leprosy, I'll feel really bad for you, but I can't put my hands on you and heal you. Jesus could. We can't in almost every circumstance. I have seen some miraculous cures in my life, but not many. But if we can't cure, can we still heal? You know, some people get cured, they don't get healed. People can get healed without being cured. We can heal. We have that power. How? Through accompaniment and care and encouragement and mercy and prayer? Yeah, we can. We can do that. We can heal people. Can we be a place where everyone is offered a place in this Christian community? Yes, we can. We can do that. Can this be a place where Jesus' ministry can be reflected in how we treat both one another and the one we don't recognize, who is new to us, comes as a stranger? Yeah, we can do that. I think more and more we're getting better at doing that. And for that I praise God. Who does Matthew say is coming out to see Jesus? The answer is everyone. Matthew names many Jewish regions and cities where people are coming from, but he also names places like the Decapolis, which was a confederation of 10 Gentile cities just on the other side of the Jordan River. And if that weren't enough, he says, and people from beyond the river, all that is Gentile territory. Jews and Gentiles were coming to Jesus. Jesus didn't care where they came from. Do you think Jesus cares where you come from? No, he doesn't. He didn't ask for passports. He didn't wonder about people looking or speaking differently from him. What Jesus offered, what he still offers, is for everyone. The ministry he's entrusted to us is for everyone. Everyone who came to Jesus got treated the same way. Everyone who came to Jesus, no matter what was broken in their bodies or in their lives, got healed, got cured. Everyone. Which means Jesus' ministry didn't circle out anyone. And neither can ours. So every part of the Bible deserves a good, hard look. Maybe especially the ones that don't seem all that special, like our reading. What we find there will tell us a lot about Jesus. The risky part about reading the Bible is it very often tells you about yourself too. And we need to know that. We need to hear that. Don't we? We are the ones who are called to see through the false beliefs and artificial boundaries erected to separate and alienate and make people feel other than. Because let's face it, if we who love and follow Jesus don't do it, who's going to do it? It's not going to get done. We're the ones called to inhabit and uphold the community God gives us so that we can invite others to join us. We're the ones called beyond ourselves to work for the good of the other guy, to live out the gospel truth that God's love is for everyone, and to reject anything falling short of the same good news Jesus brought with him this day so long ago when his ministry began.